Hello and welcome to the show. This week's Tuner Thursday, we start with a 2015 Ford Mustang from horrible Oz. I can never quite make up my mind about the 2015 Mustang. From the front, I think it's a pretty good looking car. From the rear, it is, I don't know, it looks a bit odd from the rear. I do like muscle cars though, so I was interested to see how this one would do. As far as the statistics for the car go, it is very much average for this series. The Mustang has 535 horsepower, 468 torque, which is pretty good for this series. It's about what we're seeing from most of the vehicles. The weight is an interesting one. This car is actually not that heavy, 2,700 pounds. But I wouldn't have guessed it was that light, because driving this car, it feels very big, it feels very heavy, it feels maybe sluggish is a little unfair to it, but it certainly handles like it's a lot heavier. When I sort of got in the car and went to drive it for the laps here, I had guessed they probably hadn't taken out the weight reduction on the car, because it did feel quite sluggish through the turns, but 2,700 pounds, I mean, that's lighter than quite a lot of cars. I mean, that's about the same weight as the Ford GT40 that we had here. It's not particularly heavy, but it does feel like quite a heavy vehicle. With this much power and this much torque, straight line speed is pretty good. We're getting up to around about the 160 mile an hour mark. You saw on the first time round this corner, the Mustang got a big kick of oversteer, and certainly that kink in the straight was a scary thing to deal with. Very scary corner. It can be taken flat out with the Mustang. It's right on the limit. If you get things a little bit wrong, take a slightly shonky line or are a tiny little bit too aggressive with the steering, the back end will come out and you will have a very big slide, and that's kind of how the car is generally. I mean, 500 horsepower rear-wheel drive Mustang, you know, it's probably going to slide around if you're a bit of a moron. But, yeah, provided you're careful with the car, and aside from the first corner, we had some decent grip in this vehicle. The brakes were okay, they weren't outstanding, and again, kind of carried on with the theme of the car felt a lot heavier than it actually is. I mean, the brakes, you were braking, I think it was around the 400 meter board for this turn up here, maybe the 300 meter board, I can't remember. But yeah, you were braking at about the kind of the average stopping distance for cars. I had to find a slightly different way of driving this vehicle to some of the other cars that I've raced here. Because it felt so heavy and it felt a bit sluggish, I found myself braking sort of a bit earlier and sort of focusing on getting a good exit out of the corner, because I can't really carry the corner speed into a turn. I can't carry the speed because we don't really have the grip in the car. So I was finding myself changing my driving style just a tiny little bit with the Mustang to make things work. It was perfectly drivable once I'd made that slight adjustment to the lines I was taking and the braking points I was doing. But yeah, I had to change my driving a bit. Not quite what I expected from the Mustang. Up next, we've got a Ferrari, another Ferrari 355. I do like these. I do like the 355s. From standard, they are quite a nice vehicle to drive, and when upgraded, they can often be quite quick. I get things a little bit wrong into the hairpin. May have just slightly overshot on that one. This car, power-wise, 530 horsepower, about the same as the Mustang. Torque is a little bit down, although we often see this from sort of the Ferrari supercar, mostly Ferrari supercars that we've had so far, 349, so we're about 100 torque down on the Ferrari. Amazingly, this car is 100 pounds heavier, 2,800 pounds in the 355. I would never have guessed it. This feels a lot lighter, a lot more lively, certainly a lot more lively than the Mustang. And this was another car that it was a nice vehicle to drive. There was no, unlike the Mustang that felt sort of sluggish, I had no real complaints about the 355. It did take a little bit of time to, again, I had to adjust from going from the Mustang to driving this first few laps. Weren't particularly quick, but yeah, after getting the hang of this car again, you had more grip in the 355, there is no doubt about it. You could carry more corner speed, not quite as quick in a straight line again, and it was getting up to around the 160. I think the Mustang might have actually been up to sort of 165. It wasn't quite as fast, this, but it wasn't by very much. I mean, you perhaps wouldn't expect it. It's heavier, slightly less power, and a fair bit less torque. So yeah, not quite the same acceleration from the 355, but still, it was pretty good. The brakes weren't fantastic. I was expecting this car to brake a lot quicker than it actually did. It didn't. It didn't get slowed down a huge amount. I'm guessing the reason why this car is a bit heavier, I think the 355 is around this sort of weight standard. I'm guessing they ran out of PI. The Ferrari will start off in, I think it's more mid-B class-ish, maybe even be low A class, and that doesn't give you a huge amount of room for upgrades. So if the car has racing tyres, which a lot of vehicles on here will have, all have very, very large tyre widths, you're not necessarily going to have the PI to then take off all the weight, so you have to choose. Do you go for racing tyres, or do you go for less weight but have worse tyres? And that would be what I expect would be on this car, because yeah, it's surprisingly heavy, and it means that the braking is not at all. Certainly on the first few laps, I was finding myself expecting to brake later than I could with the Mustang, and you couldn't really brake that much later. But it did feel more lively through the turns. We also didn't have the same oversteer problems that we got. I say oversteer problems. We didn't really get oversteer with the 355. As you can see there, I completely outbraked myself. That was me trying to push it a little bit, and it didn't work. We didn't have oversteer problems. Turn 1. Or the king of the straight. There was no issues with being flat out around in this car. I think the only time I ever really got it sideways was the roundabout, changing from first to second at the roundabout, but most cars will do that. Yeah, a relatively easy car to drive, this one. Just the brakes were not quite what I was expecting from it. Up next, from a random demon, we have got a Honda CRX. Interesting choice of car. It's the only four-wheel drive vehicle of this particular episode. We are quite low on power, 373, and quite low on torque as well, 289. However, I do know that the CRXs can be really rather fast, and it is certainly quite light, 2,065 pounds, making it one of the lightest cars. I think only the Datsun is lighter than this. Maybe the Lotus 211. I don't really count that. But yeah, it makes it very, very light. And with four-wheel drive, of course, you can put all of the power down all at once, and there is no real issues from this car. I'm not sure. Yeah, the power to weight ratio is pretty good. It maybe not quite the most impressive that we've had. It is certainly quick on the acceleration front. When it comes to the handling, even though it is four-wheel drive, it will slide around a little bit when you go to sort of boot it out of a corner. It will slide around. I mean, it looks, to say, look at it, it looks kind of ridiculously fast on the, on the acceleration at some of these corners. And if you get everything right, you can really fire the car out of a turn. It just does lack a little bit of top-end speed. Again, we're not talking by a huge amount. I think this was about 155-ish as we get a big slide. And you can see by the black marks around the track that I've been having a few slides with this car. And you can see by the ding on the door, I may have had a small bump somewhere. Very nearly run the wall on the outside there. I've completely lost track of what I was saying about the car. Yeah, it does slide around a little bit, and it isn't the fastest car in a straight line. The brakes, again, the brakes weren't as good as I was expecting on the CRX. Despite it being a very, very light car, it wasn't braking, I think it was about the 400, maybe 450 meter board into the first big braking zone. And that's not a huge amount better than the other cars that have gone today. And I was expecting, with it being such a light vehicle, that you could jump on the brakes ridiculously late, and you couldn't quite. There was decent grip through the corners. There was good acceleration out of the turns, but yeah, it wasn't quite the ludicrous thing that I expected from the CRX. A solid car, despite, you know, there was a little bit of sliding going on with it as I kept very close. I'm surprised I haven't ended up in that tyre bundle yet. Yeah, it was a solid car, a fairly easy one to drive, provided you're not a complete and utter yobbo with the with the accelerator pedal. You've got to be careful with the curbs. The little CRX was not a massive fan of going on the curbs. Again, you can see the back end was just starting to let go, just a little tiny bit. It didn't have any big sideways moments like you could get with the Mustang. It was just a little tiny bit when really pushed hard. I mean, you want to avoid the curbs with pretty much all of the vehicles here, and in general, the smaller, shorter wheelbase cars do tend to get a little bit more upset if you do accidentally clonk a curb. But yeah, I just pretty much avoided it with the CRX. So yeah, didn't have any major problems as we get try to get on the power a little bit too soon and give the wall another slight brush. Our final vehicle for the day comes from Mess 8 with a Lamborghini Miura. Now this is the most powerful car that we've had on the Tuner Thursday series. 673 horsepower going to the rear wheels, 501 torques in a car that weighs 2,700 pounds. It's got a lot of power and a lot of torque. I believe it has the 6-litre V12 in this car, so there is an awful lot of power going through the rear wheels of this. You can also see that the wheels on the back are humongous. Which is useful. They have fairly sizable tyres on this car, which means power delivery is not as scary as you might think. Certainly when you hear 673 horsepower in a classic Italian supercar, I was somewhat concerned about how the Miura might actually deal with the power, and certainly things can go wrong. As you see, as I leave the roundabout, and again, I'm pushing through these next couple of corners, trying to make up for that big slide. You will get the Miura sideways on power delivery if you're a little bit too, shall we say, brave with the throttle. If you just a little bit too much throttle, and you will spin the wheels up and it will go very sideways. But if you are careful, and I don't mean you have to be incredibly ludicrously sensitive with everything, provided you're not an utter tool, you will be able to drive this car remarkably easy. Far easier than I expected, with all of this power. And let's face it, while it is a good chassis, don't get me wrong, it is a rather old car that this thing is in. Now, of course, it's going to have race brakes and race suspension and so on, but it's still an old platform, if you like. The Miura did very well. It was very controllable. Straight line speed was a quick car. I think it was up to about 165 miles an hour coming into the first braking zone again, making it one of the fastest cars in a straight line. Corner speed, corner grip was also pretty damn good from this vehicle. The braking points, you were braking a little bit earlier perhaps than some cars because you were just going a lot faster. Once you got this out of a corner, once you started accelerating down towards the next corner, this thing would pick up some serious speed, so you're perhaps braking a little bit earlier. But the brakes certainly weren't noticeably bad on this car. They were sort of around average, and what made up for it was the very fast acceleration in between corners. And yeah, through the turns, it was a lot nicer than I expected. Certainly have to be a little bit careful not to get carried away. You could have a lot of sideways moments with the Miura if you wanted to, but if you gave it respect and drove it sensibly, you would get a quick lap out of it. You could keep the car all under control. And most of the cars here have been surprising this week for various reasons. I didn't expect a rather powerful Miura to be an easy car to drive. I didn't have too many problems with the Miura on the curbs either. Like here, I run the curbs and that barely put the car on two wheels and didn't kick it sideways, which is unusual. I mean, normally through there, if the car doesn't go massively up on two wheels, it will throw the back end out sideways. But the Miura didn't seem to have too many problems with running the curbs. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but it could get away with it. On to the times, and it is the Lamborghini that goes into the top three, being only the third car to get into the 1 minute 23s. Sorry, I can speak English. 123.971. It is a rather crowded area around that low 24s, high 23 section. Yeah, that's a quick time. That is a very quick time from the Miura, and most of that is made up for in straight line speed and acceleration. We have to go a little bit further down to find the rest of the cars. They all actually ended up pretty damn close together. The Ferrari 355 at 124.6, just outside the top 10 cars. The CRX a fraction behind the Ferrari at 124.761, and a little bit further down, but not that far, we find the Ford Mustang at 25.157. Very crowded, low 25 area there. Yeah, they're all good cars, all decent cars to drive. I think the Mustang felt a little heavy in the turns, and you lost a little bit of corner speed. The CRX perhaps didn't quite have the same straight line speed, didn't quite have the same power as some of the other cars. And the 355 was actually a little bit heavy, which is a strange thing to say about Ferrari, but there you go. Well, we have now 2 Italian cars in the top. The Italians are fighting back after last week, but that is it for this episode. If the submissions for this competition are now closed, if you have submitted a car on our forums, please make sure that the tune is actually uploaded on the storefront. After a couple of weeks now of doing these, you've got 2 more weeks to make sure they're uploaded. After that 2 weeks, if I go to do your car and it's not uploaded, your entry will be removed, because I can't be faffing around forever with these. So please make sure your cars, if you've entered, are actually up on the storefront. But that is it from me, so thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.